Today I'm making Stormtrooper armor. For this build, I used EVA foam, craft foam, coffee foam, putty, super glue, hot glue, cutting tools, sanding tools, safety gear, scissors, razor pens, and a box cutter. I'm gonna start with the shoulders because I've just made a bunch of pauldrons over the years. It's really where I have the most experience. It goes pauldrons, helmets, gauntlets, etc. I honestly think it's just because humans have 2 arms but only 1 head, so for every costume it's like twice the experience. I like to figure these out on scrap cardboard first before transferring them to clean cardstock and scanning them in to make them available to you guys. And that's just because there's usually some refinement in this process, and I like to take care of all that refinement work in a more disposable material. Also, I don't want you to waste your printer ink on cardboard. It seems a little unnecessary. I traced that onto white EVA foam and cut it out with the razor pen. I'm using white EVA foam so that I don't have to paint. I mean, if I wanted it to be shiny, I could always just use gloss white acrylic paint later on, but that's not really the look I'm going for. I know it's not technically accurate because the original ones were shiny, but maybe watching Clone Wars for so many years, it just, my headcanon is Stormtrooper armor should be dirty and matte textured. Once it was cut out, I heat formed it with my heat gun. Then I shaped it on a small rounded surface and placed it inside of a large rounded surface so that it would hold on to that shape as it cooled. After it cooled, I glued the seam together with super glue. Then I covered the seam with a strip of foam from the puzzle pieces that come with the floor mats. I cut off the overhang on the bottom, and on the top I wrapped it underneath. I repeated those steps for the other shoulder, and then moved down to the chest. I used one of my old armor templates for that just because it happened to match. At least the back blade does anyway. Generally, I make my templates in halves so that they can be folded over and each side will come out symmetrical. I cut that out, and because those were very long cuts, my blade dulled out a bit at the end and tore up the foam on a few of the seams. Now, that's not really a huge issue because that's going to be out of sight when you're wearing it, but it's one of those nitpicky things, and the belt sander is right there. So I smoothed out that edge on the sander and was able to satisfy my OCD. Once I was finished sanding, I heat formed that piece as well. This is going to take longer because the piece is so much larger, but it's no big deal. We're talking about minutes here. It's no big deal. Since it is so much larger than the pauldrons, for the cool down process, I put it in a concrete form tube left over from the Detective Miller pet nuke build. It cooled pretty quick, but it's still kind of two-dimensional, so I curved it a little bit at the top and bottom by cutting darts and gluing them back together. It's subtle, but from certain angles it'll stand out. There's a detail box on the back, so I got to work on that. I cut the long sides at a slightly slanted angle so that it would sit correctly on the now curved back plate. Then I glued them together, and I used more puzzle piece strips to increase the width of that edge. Next, I cut a panel to close it up, glued it in there, glued a 0 and an 11 on top of that, and then glued the whole thing to the back plate. Lastly, I covered the seams with putty. Lastly for this part. This project is going to take at least a week, and putty always takes longer to dry than you think it will. So as I finish an armor section, I'll putty it and set it aside to dry while I work on the next one, knowing that by the time I'm done with the last piece, the rest will all be ready to assemble. Gotta strategize. Next, I made the chest piece. As much as I'd love to just use my basic chest template, the Stormtrooper chest plate is needlessly complicated. So I'm gonna have to do some geometry to figure out those pecs. The whole thing's supposed to be vacuum formed, you know? So just flopped onto a sculpture. So I'm trying to geometrically recreate something with angles and squares that's supposed to be, quickly and awkwardly formed over something curved. So I cut those, traced them, heat formed them, all the same steps as before, and added all the geometric shapes so that they would sit right. And when they were in, I puttied those seams. Next, I made the shoulder straps. These are more cosmetic than functional. I'll eventually need to put real straps underneath them. I made them out of 4mm craft foam, which I cut into strips and super glued together. Then I super glued them into the armor, connecting the front and back pieces. I glued actual buckles to the sides of the armor segments. Whenever I use hot glue, I like to weight down the pieces afterwards with machinist blocks to hold them in place and to draw out the heat, thus allowing the glue to dry faster. Well, cool faster. After that, I got to work on the arms. I was hoping to save time by just using my Kenobi armor and interchanging those pieces, but the Clone Wars armor is not exactly the same. It's actually more angular than the Stormtrooper armor, so I was out of luck. I made the upper arms using the same process as all the other pieces. They're actually a little easier because they're not curved spherically, they're just tubes. Next for the gauntlet, I used a gauntlet template left over from some armor build, I don't know. I heat formed that and placed it inside the upper arm to cool. And of course there's a needlessly complicated detail on the outside, so I made that as well. Thanks, Macquarie. Then I puttied the seams. I repeated those steps to make the other arm. Now for the middle. And I actually don't have a template on myself below the shoulders. Weird. No, I know what that is. That's like usually the hot new prop that everybody wants me to build is a helmet. So just fell into a pattern of building helmets. I mean, when has the hot new prop ever been thigh armor? I mean, I guess RoboCop had a holster built into his leg, but that kind of predates YouTube, don't it? What are you talking about? Star Wars was way before RoboCop. I'm getting off track here. Noted. What are we doing? Templates. I need new templates. So let's make a tape dummy. To get body patterns without 3D scanning equipment, I put on some clothes that I don't mind destroying and got wrapped up in duct tape. When the tape is cut off, it can be laid flat and used to recreate three-dimensional representations, thus allowing me to make armor that actually fits. Again, not so tight because I do have to breathe.
I'm trying.
Yeah, if it's too tight, then your armor is going to be uncomfortably tight, so keep that in mind. I think those pieces I might cut outside the lines.
It's a sleeve.
It helps do the arms lengthwise, by the way. At least I think it does, in terms of saving tape. If I pass out...
I don't even know how I'm going to explain that to you.
If I pass out, there are scissors under that second thing of duct tape.
Oh, you should have started with that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I really should have. And they're specifically designed to cut through fabric. So what you're going to do is start at the neck and cut down the chest, which will free up my lungs.
Just in case you got it.
Yeah.
Don't edit that out. Remember, kids. Make sure you have your cover story planned in advance so they don't think you're weird.
Oh, that ship has sailed long ago. Because humans are mostly symmetrical, you don't have to do both sides. You can just reverse the first side in order to get the other one. We used a whole roll on a side and a half. You know, if you're worried about wasting tape. When you've done at least one side, you can cut it off as long as you've made hash marks to make sure that you know how it's gonna line back up again. From the tape dummy, I was able to make cardboard templates matching my measurements. Then I made a foam mannequin of myself and pulled templates from that, which matched the shape of the Stormtrooper armor plates, but in a size that actually fits me. Now, if I was only ever gonna make one suit of armor, then instead of making the mannequin, I could have just cut the tape in the shape of the Stormtrooper armor and leave it at that, but that means that the tape templates will be single use only, and I plan on making multiple suits of armor, and I don't want to have to wrap myself in duct tape for every single one going forward. Not to mention, I think there's some overlap. Yeah, in the stomach area, there's some overlap with the plates, so it wouldn't quite work. This way, I can get multiple template patterns, and my armor will always fit, unless I inhale a sleeve of Oreos a day. No promises. First, I pulled a template off the dummy for the shin guards, traced those onto foam, cut them out, heat formed them, just like I did with all the previous armor pieces. I connected the seam in the front, but not fully in the back, otherwise I'll rip it when I try to fit my foot through the narrow ankle end. That end will need a Velcro attachment point. To help align the foot seam, I used triangular registration marks. I can get away with this because the Stormtrooper armor, as part of its design, has a raised bevel strip in the front and the back of the limb segments, which will hide the seam and any markings close by. I cut those bevel strips out of 4mm craft foam. There's also a bevel at the top by the knee, but here's a crazy thing about Stormtrooper armor that I never noticed until I started this project. The knees are asymmetrical. One leg has this standard bevel to leave room for a mini utility belt on the knee, well, just above the knee, and the other has a raised knee guard, which is crazy to me, but I never noticed in a million viewings of that movie. But even when combing through every shot trying to get reference photos for my Graflex saber build, I never noticed it, so can I really complain? So I made the knee guard, which is oddly geometric amongst all these curves, and attached it to the second shin guard. Then I pulled a thigh armor template from the dummy and made those armor sections. As I'm moving up the body, I'm switching to 4mm foam because there's gonna be a lot of layered detail towards the middle, and that's gonna look super weird if I'm using the 3/8 inch floor mat foam. You can get this stuff at craft stores, by the way. Most craft stores have caught on to the whole cosplay thing, so they carry a wide variety of craft foam, but you still gotta go to the hardware stores for the foam floor mats, which is nuts. You'd think somebody would have told them. The thinner stuff is admittedly easier to heat form, but that also makes it easier to burn, so watch out. Oh, I made the other leg by reversing the template, by the way. Next, I made the knee belt. Seriously, who came up with that? I used 2mm foam for the belt itself and scrap 1/2" floor mat foam for the boxes. These are cosmetic, I'm not gonna actually store anything in them. Then I attached them to the armor. I made the codpiece out of 2 halves and then heat formed them to glue them together. I'll often reheat armor plates after the sections are glued together and the glue is dry, just to even them out a little bit and make them more symmetrical. Then I made a top layer of detail, which consists of an extra armor plate and a bevel, which is going to cover up the seam. After that, I worked on the belt. It's basically a larger version of the knee belt. I'm using 2mm foam for the front facing portion, which is a little bit wider than the rest of it, and I'm using 1/2" foam for the utility boxes, and some 4mm for the smaller details. Although I do recommend picking up a white belt and mounting the details to that, because as I'm doing this, I'm realizing, you know, this might be okay for camera. It's not going to survive a convention, or even a Halloween party. It's definitely not going to survive a Halloween party. Nope. Yeah, so get a white belt. There are also 2 pouches that hang down from either side. Now for the cylinder on the back of the belt. This is one of those details that you can omit if you're in a time crunch. I probably should have done that myself. But even if you're going for accuracy, you're gonna have some tough calls to make. Because in the original Star Wars, 1977, Luke's armor doesn't have this. He's got a totally unique and specific gearbox on the back instead of the cylinder that's on everybody else's armor. It's probably just audio gear. Like, I've done some audio work, and I was originally trained on this ancient data recorder that looked like it was from the 80s, and it looks really similar to the one that Luke has on the back of his record. So I'm thinking that's his studio microphone equipment, not a piece of technology. Although I'm sure somebody has an in-universe explanation. Have at it in the comments below. Oh, and partway through the trash compactor scene, Hans just disappears. Star Wars, it's one of my favorite movies, but terrible for continuity. You'll lose your mind. So it's a gray cylinder with a white wrap. I cut some really clean circles and exterior panel pieces, and the inside is garbage, just straight up garbage. All I'm trying to do is use up my scrap foam. I covered that garbage with white paneling. When the glue dried, I added the detail greeblies. Most of these details are accurate, you know, the outward facing ones, but the ones on the sides are extra, and the ones on the back are really only there for stability, just so that there's less stress on the Velcro. And then I added Velcro. I also added these 2 little greeblies here, which I don't think are canon, but it's just going to keep it flat. It's going to keep flat adhesion to the other one. Now for the torso. I pulled some dummy templates for that. I made the belly plate out of 4mm craft foam. Because it comes in a roll, I actually don't need to heat form it, so, you know, cut a break. I cut a large piece for the front and then a narrow one for the center, as well as 2 strips for the ribbing on either side, and 1 to go on top of the center panel above the control box, which was a rectangular piece. Then I greeblyed it up with some scrap foam and hole punch offcuts. Then I made the back panel in pretty much the same way, minus all the details. It just has a slight rectangular panel, which I made out of 2mm foam. Then I made the seat out of more 4mm and puttied the last of the seams. Then I moved on to the outermost pieces. I attached a little armor plate to the back of some black gloves to make the hands, and I picked up some costume boots for the feet. Lastly, I attached some straps, buckles, and Velcro to the various armor pieces to hold them all together. Not all of them need it, just the pieces that might slide off without them. And I'm probably gonna have to redo some of these after viewing the footage, just to get it to fit perfectly. But for now, this is fine. Now, you don't need to put buckles on every single attachment. Some of these pieces are simply draped, whereas others are gonna require buckles. I did some basic test fittings on the dummy to make sure the Velcro was in the right spot, but I haven't finished the arms yet, so I really won't know without trying it on myself. So let's go ahead with that. I threw on some black clothes to go underneath and grabbed the helmet that I built in another video. Oh, that'll be linked at the end of this one and in the comments and description below, so be sure to check that out. And I put it all together, and that's how to make Stormtrooper armor. This is the wrong background for this. I should be doing, I think this is like a stand-up background. What's the deal with Starlight food? See, it bugs me that you can't see the boots. You can't see how awesome these boots, you can't see how ridiculous these boots are. Alright, let's go over to the regular background. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this video. Once again, I'd like to thank my patrons. These videos just wouldn't be possible without the support of my patrons. So if you enjoy these builds, want to see more of them, and want your build request to carry a bit more weight, then think about heading on over to the Patreon page, where you can enjoy ad-free early uploads. Anything you can pledge goes towards improving the video quality and shop equipment, as well as allowing me to put together bigger and more exciting projects for you on the channel. Alright, hope you enjoyed this. Don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the bell icon to be notified of the future uploads, because it's kind of at a totally random schedule. And let me know what other props you'd like to see me make in comments down below. Thanks again, happy crafting, see you later. I don't know what Luke was complaining about. I can see everything in this helmet. It's fogging up a bit though. It's not so bad. But man, I would not want to wear this in the desert.